South Side, Chicago. Winter of 2005. The wind howled through the narrow alleys, carrying empty potato chip wrappers into the gray sky. Snow clung in patches to the roofs of old cars parked along the curb, mingling with the cracked pavement that had never been repaired. Elijah Carter, just 10 years old, ran with his head down. His torn backpack bounced behind him, the zipper long gone since last month. He wasn't running because he was late for school, he was running because it was cold. So cold that if he stood still, he'd freeze to death. Every morning, Elijah left the smoke-filled two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old housing project. His mother, Cassandra, worked the night shift at the hospital and still wasn't home. He carefully locked the door, then stuffed the key into his sock. His mother's instructions were clear: don't trust anyone. Not even people you know. A police siren blared behind him. Elijah flinched. A patrol car cruised by, then came to a sudden stop. The door swung open, and a white officer stepped out, hand resting on his holstered gun. "Hey! Kid, stop right there!" Elijah froze. His stomach turned cold, not from the wind, but from the fear etched into his bones since before he could read. I'm just going to school, sir," he stammered. "Why were you running?" "What are you hiding in that backpack?" the officer asked, stepping closer. Elijah raised his hands, a reflex his mother had drilled into him: always keep your hands up. Don't talk fast. Don't look them in the eyes too long. The officer didn't listen. He yanked the backpack off Elijah's shoulders, threw it to the ground, and tore it open. A water-damaged book and a box of pencils spilled out. Elijah swallowed hard, about to speak, when a voice shouted from down the block. "Elijah! Get away from him!" Cassandra charged down the street like a storm, still in her wrinkled nurse scrubs. Her face was twisted with fury, fear, and exhaustion. She planted herself between her son and the half-drawn gun. "He's my son. He's 10 years old. He's going to school, can't you see that?" The officer hesitated. After a moment, he shrugged, stepped back, and looked at the mother and son with empty eyes, then turned and walked away. Not a single word of apology. Cassandra collapsed onto the sidewalk, pulling Elijah into her arms, holding him tight. Her hands trembled with rage, fear, and helplessness. Elijah didn't cry. He just stared after the police car as it disappeared around the corner. In his 10-year-old eyes, the image of a white man with his hand on a gun, ready to shoot a kid for running on a winter morning, was burned deep. That night, the little apartment was filled with the low hum of an old heater. Elijah sat on the floor, his head resting in his mother's lap. "Mama," he whispered. "Why are they scared of me? I didn't do anything." Cassandra looked out the window. The night outside was like a curtain that couldn't be torn. She stroked her son's hair gently and said, "Because they don't see your heart, Elijah. All they see is your skin. So, what do I do? You show them what they don't want to see. You show them your mind. Your kindness. You don't let them break you. Can I change them? If you dare to dream. And if you work for it, yes. Elijah, you can." Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, a seed had begun to grow in the heart of a 10-year-old black boy. South Side Elementary School. March, 2006. South Side Elementary didn't have white fences or a pretty archway at the entrance. It was just a worn-down row of red brick buildings nestled between crumbling apartment blocks. The schoolyard was a cracked stretch of concrete, with a broken basketball hoop dangling like a loose tooth about to fall out. In Class 5B, Elijah sat in the back row, as always. He was quiet, eyes fixed on the window, where gray clouds slithered across the sky. Their previous teacher, Ms. Walker, had quit after suffering a panic attack during a student fight. Students here weren't easy to teach, especially when most of them carried a deep, simmering anger, born from poverty, broken homes, injustice, and nights without power. The classroom door swung open. "Good morning, everyone." A gentle male voice rang out, carrying with it an unusual energy. A tall, thin white man with dark brown curly hair stood at the front of the room. His sleeves were rolled up, his light gray tie loose but neat. In his hands was a heavy stack of books. "My name is Mr. Moore. Starting today, I'll be teaching you American literature." The classroom buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Some kids snickered mockingly. Someone threw a crumpled paper ball at him. Elijah stayed quiet, but something flickered in his eyes: curiosity. Not many white teachers came to Southside, and even fewer were young, passionate, and still full of hope. Mr. Moore didn't snap. He simply bent down, picked up the paper, and smiled. "Good. Someone's testing me. Let's begin." The first week passed, and most students continued ignoring Mr. Moore's lessons. But Elijah didn't. He was drawn to the way Mr. Moore spoke about words, like each sentence, each passage, could carry entire worlds within it. The teacher read from Martin Luther King Jr., then Langston Hughes, then Maya Angelou. And for the first time, Elijah felt like someone was describing his pain, only through a sharper, clearer lens, through language. One late afternoon, when the class had already left, Elijah stayed behind to help clean the board. Mr. Moore walked up to him. "You read more than I thought, Elijah. How do you know?" Your response to Hughes' "I, too, that wasn't random. You understood it." Elijah lowered his head. He wasn't used to being praised. Mr. Moore opened his bag and pulled out a worn paperback. "I've got something for you." "What is it?" "Long Walk to Freedom. Nelson Mandela's memoir." Elijah took it, holding it like a treasure. "You're a very smart boy, Elijah. But being smart isn't enough. What else do I need?" "Courage. To speak up. To stand up. To not be broken by the way people see you." Elijah didn't answer. But that night, he read for 3 straight hours under the dim yellow light of his tiny bedroom. When he got to the part where Mandela sat in his dark prison cell and still believed in the future, Elijah cried. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. The next morning, in his journal notebook, Elijah wrote a single line. "One day, I'll rise, not to shout, but to make the whole world listen." Chicago, spring 2008. Elijah, 13 years old. That day, school let out early, another budget cut from the city council slashing education funds. Elijah didn't complain. He liked getting home early. It gave him time to write in his journal or continue reading To Kill a Mockingbird, which Mr. Moore had just lent him. He pushed open the creaky wooden door and stepped into their third-floor apartment. But instead of the usual smell of soap and the hum of the radio, he found his mother sitting frozen in the chair, her face pale. "Mom?" "Elijah," Cassandra whispered, as if the next words were stuck in her throat. "Your father was arrested." The room seemed to freeze. Elijah blinked. "Arrested? For what?" "An armed robbery at a grocery store on the west side. They say your father was there. But he was staying at your aunt's in Gary, Indiana. The whole family over there can confirm it." "Is there any proof? Cameras? Witnesses?" "No. Just someone's statement, and an officer said he looked like the guy." Cassandra held her head in her hands and collapsed onto the table. Elijah fell silent. "Looked like." 2 words that sliced through his mind like a blade. Looked like a thief. Because he was black. Because he'd once done time for driving without a license. Because he was a man carrying the weight of his past. His father, Marlon Carter, wasn't perfect. He'd made mistakes in his youth. But since getting out, he'd tried to make things right, going to church, working back-breaking warehouse shifts, sending money home. He taught Elijah to play chess, to read about Malcolm X, and told him, "Son, you've got to rise above your own anger." And now he was trapped again, in a cycle with no escape. Weeks later, the court delivered its sentence, 15 years in prison. No physical evidence. Just a suspicious glance and a shaky statement from a not completely sure witness. Elijah sat beside his mother in the courtroom. He didn't cry, but his fists clenched so tight they bled. In his mind was the image of his father, silent, head bowed, not fighting back. Not because he was guilty, but because he knew no one would listen if he did. Mr. Moore came to the Carters' home on a rainy evening. He brought 2 bags of groceries and a sealed envelope. "I know this is unjust, Elijah." "You don't know," Elijah whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't know what it feels like when the whole system looks at me like I'm just another version of him. Maybe not entirely. But I see you. I believe in you. And I believe you can turn this anger into power." Elijah looked up. In his tear-filled eyes, something sparked. "They took my father from our family. I'll take something back, not with weapons, but with words. With will. And with knowledge, Elijah. You have to learn. You have to be better than anything they ever imagined you could be." Elijah nodded. That night, in the rain, the 13-year-old boy chose his own path, not silence, not violence, not surrender, but to rise, with intellect. Blue book at the end of the chapter, Elijah wrote in his journal. "They can shackle my father's hands, but they can't shackle my dreams." Chicago, fall 2010. Elijah, 15 years old. Lincoln Preparatory Academy was a private high school nestled in the North Shore, a place where trees were trimmed into perfect squares and the pale brick buildings stood behind imposing black iron gates. Elijah stepped off the public bus, wearing a neatly pressed blue shirt, an old but spotless leather satchel slung over his shoulder. He had just received the school's most prestigious full scholarship, one of only 3 black students in the entire 10th grade. This school was a world apart from anything he had ever known. There was a private parking lot just for students, a 3D printing tech lab, even a Shakespeare acting class taught by a real theater director. But from the very first glance he got from the other students, Elijah understood. He didn't belong here. In American literature class, when the teacher mentioned The Great Gatsby, a blonde boy named Tyler said, "Gatsby was just a poor guy trying to climb the social ladder, kind of like those people chasing the American dream from, you know, the special neighborhoods." The class giggled. Elijah sat frozen, a chill down his spine. Tyler hadn't named him, but everyone glanced his way. In the cafeteria, he ate alone. No one invited him to study groups. No one picked him for discussion teams. A soft-spoken Asian girl named Lynn was the only one who smiled and greeted him, but after a few classmates teased her for hanging out with the scholarship kid, she quietly withdrew too. Mr. Moore called to check in. "You holding up okay?" "I'm fine. It's just," Elijah hesitated. "They don't need to scream slurs to show prejudice. They use silence. That's the cruelest kind." Elijah started staying late in the school library. He read W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, James Baldwin. He jotted down passages about double consciousness, the feeling of being both American and black, constantly forced to see oneself through the eyes of others. One night, in his small room, Elijah picked up his pen and wrote, "They see me as a stranger, no matter how straight I stand, how perfect my grammar is, how sharp my blazer, or how high my scholarship. They don't say my name, but I hear their silence in every glance." Instead of breaking, Elijah turned their stares into fuel. He joined the debate team. At first, no one believed he'd last. But then he left the entire auditorium speechless as he argued against racial discrimination in U.S. housing policy. He became the keynote speaker at the school-wide Voice of Youth conference. And by junior year, Elijah was officially invited to speak at the Chicago City Council on the topic. Is the American dream for everyone? Blue book at the end of the chapter, Elijah sat alone in the school courtyard beneath an oak tree. In his hand was a letter from his mother. "My son, never let the way others see you blur the truth of who you are in the mirror. You are Elijah, and you were born to walk through every invisible wall." He folded the letter, looked up. In his eyes burned a quiet certainty, like a spark waiting to catch fire. Chicago, spring 2012. Elijah, 16 years old, junior year. Lincoln Prep hosted an annual event called the Youth Leadership Forum, a gathering where students from elite high schools across Chicago came together to debate the most pressing topics of the day: education policy, social justice, the environment, and technological innovation. This year's theme was, "Does the American Dream Still Exist?" Each school was invited to nominate one student to deliver a keynote speech. At Lincoln, the faculty council selected Elijah, not out of sympathy, but because his essay was simply impossible to ignore. Speech balloon: the speech, the story no one tells. Elijah stepped onto the stage in the school's grand auditorium. In front of him sat over 300 people: students, teachers, parents, and local journalists. They were well-dressed, neatly seated, their faces serious beneath the lights. Elijah stood still and took a deep breath. "My name is Elijah Carter. I am the son of a man serving a wrongful 15-year prison sentence. I am the only black student in Lincoln Prep's honors class. And I've spent the past 3 years asking myself, why do I still feel invisible even when I've done everything to be seen?" The room grew silent. We're told the American dream is for everyone. If you work hard. If you don't complain. If you follow the rules. But I've lived in two worlds. One is my mother's world, where she has to choose between rent and her heart medication. And the other is the world of my classmates here, where parents can afford SAT prep classes, ski trips in Colorado, and private college counselors. He paused. His eyes scanned the crowd of stunned faces. "I'm not here asking for pity. I'm here to say this. The American dream does still exist. But it isn't fair when the starting lines are drawn so far apart. And sometimes, the only thing I really need isn't privilege. It's fairness. It's a real handshake. It's a seat at the table. Where my voice isn't labeled * too sensitive, too angry, or too black." When Elijah finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then applause erupted. At first scattered. Then growing, rising, crashing like waves, until the whole hall was on its feet. In the crowd, his English teacher, the one who once overlooked him, stood clapping with teary eyes. Lynn, the Vietnamese girl who had once smiled at him when no one else did, ran backstage to hug him. And Drew, a white student who had mocked him in class the year before, lowered his eyes and whispered, "I never thought about it like that. You really made me think." Camera with flash that evening, a video clip of Elijah's speech was posted on social media. The black boy with a voice like fire and eyes like mirrors. One speech can change the way a school sees itself. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat on his bed, laptop open, scrolling through hundreds of comments, emails, and messages from strangers. "You spoke for my son. I'm a teacher in Texas. You made me want to change how I teach. Elijah, keep speaking. We're listening." He opened his journal and wrote, "For the first time, I'm not invisible. Not because I shouted. But because I told the truth." Blue book. End of chapter. Elijah sat before the mirror, tying his tie. He looked at himself, clearly, confidently. "I'm not just speaking for me. I'm speaking for those who were never invited to speak at all." Harvard University, fall 2013. Elijah, 18 years old. Elijah set foot on Harvard's campus for the first time on a chilly August morning. The air was crisp, the centuries-old red brick walls loomed quietly, and a bell tower shimmered faintly behind the mist, evoking a strange sense of solemnity. It felt like this wasn't just a university, but a world entirely of its own. He stepped into the freshman dorm. In the shared room, his new roommate, a white boy named Spencer from Connecticut, was playing classical music while hanging a photo of his father shaking hands with President Bush. "Oh, you must be Elijah. I read your speech, pretty cool, man." "But you know," Spencer said, glancing at Elijah's worn leather bag. "We really are different, huh?" Elijah gave a faint smile. He knew. He could feel it, in their eyes, in the way they shook his hand, in the cautious way they pronounced his name. Brain classrooms and invisible distance. In political philosophy class, the professor asked, "Can anyone give an example of systemic injustice?" Elijah raised his hand and spoke about the justice system. About his father, wrongfully imprisoned on baseless charges. A girl spoke up right after. "But not everyone's falsely accused. We can't always blame the system, can we?" The whole class nodded in agreement. Elijah felt as if he'd been stripped bare under their gazes, even though he had simply told the truth. After class, no one walked with him. They talked about skiing trips, summer holidays in Greece, and other things Elijah only knew from magazines. Books alone in the ivory tower. Every night, Elijah stayed in the library until late. Not just studying, but straining to survive. He knew, if he failed, no one would say Elijah wasn't ready. They'd say, those kids with special access weren't ready. He joined the first group of black students in his class. They gathered in a small basement room beneath the dorms, sharing familiar stories. Being seen as the diversity quota. Hearing, "Wow, your English is so good." Having their achievements doubted. Being expected to speak on behalf of the entire community. A girl named Kenya said, "I don't want to represent all the time. I just want to be myself." Elijah understood that more than anyone. But he also knew, if they didn't speak up, who would? Megaphone first victory, no more silence. At the end of his freshman year, Elijah entered an essay contest titled Justice in Society. The theme: can traditional institutions become more just? Elijah wrote about his father. About silence. About the feeling of being looked through, as if invisible. But he also wrote about hope, about teachers like Mr. Moore, about the scholarship door that cracked open, even just a little. His essay won first prize across the university. It was published in the Harvard Crimson, the most prestigious campus paper. The final lines rang out like a declaration. "I am not a product of pity. I am the outcome of a quiet, but unyielding, struggle. And the American dream will never be real if it only belongs to those who start at the finish line." Milky Way. End of chapter. Light from within. That night, Elijah stood alone on the steps of Widener Library. A light rain fell. He called his mother. "I won the essay prize. That's my boy. You earned it." Elijah looked up at the towering buildings. Maybe the world hadn't fully accepted him yet. But now, he no longer bowed his head. He understood this now. No one can take your light away. Unless you let them. Chicago, summer 2017. Elijah, 22 years old, senior at Harvard. After 4 years at Harvard, Elijah returned to his old neighborhood in South Side Chicago. The house he once lived in was still the same, peeling paint, rusted tin roof. But one thing had changed. He was no longer Elijah the boy, but Elijah the young man with a dream to bring light to the places long forgotten. Derelict house, the old neighborhood, wounds that haven't healed. Elijah walked past the old corner store, where a group of kids were playing ball in a dusty lot. A young black boy, around 10 years old, looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Are you someone from TV? You look like those guys from scholarship ads." Elijah smiled. "Nah, I used to live right there, on that corner. Just like you." The police still rolled by every night. Roosevelt High, where Elijah once studied, still had no proper library, still lacked advanced courses, and still had too few black teachers. But now, Elijah wasn't just remembering these things. He wanted to change them. Seedling a seed is planted, a classroom for every dream. He started small, hosting free tutoring sessions on weekends at the local library. Soon, dozens of kids showed up. Some in 3rd grade still struggled to read fluently. Some in 9th grade had never believed college was even possible. Elijah called his program the Dream Table, a table where every dream could take a seat. He applied for funding from educational nonprofits. He reached out to old classmates, Harvard professors, local teachers, and turned the Dream Table from a small tutoring circle into a full-fledged college prep and career mentoring program for Black youth in under-resourced neighborhoods. Collision: the first pushback, doubt and old wounds. Not everyone believed in him. Some parents shook their heads. Kids like him make it 'cause they're lucky. The rest of us never stood a chance. Someone in the neighborhood muttered, "He got smart and left. Now he's back playing hero." Elijah didn't get angry. He understood their pain, the kind passed down through generations. So he didn't argue. He acted. Glowing Star: the first forum, and a small miracle. Elijah hosted the Black Youth Futures Forum, inviting successful students from top universities, Black entrepreneurs, and parents who were once immigrants themselves. Over 200 people showed up, more than he ever expected. In the back row, a skinny boy named Malik raised his hand. "What if I got bad grades before? Do I still have a shot?" Elijah answered, "No one's born perfect. But if you don't give up, the world won't dare give up on you." Dove a message to his father, faith never lost. That night, Elijah sat down and wrote a letter to the prison where his father had been held for over 12 years. "Dad, today I stood in a school where teachers once doubted me. This time, they invited me to teach. I spoke about kids who were just like me back then. And just like you. We're learning how to dream again. And this time, I believe none of us will have to dream alone." End of chapter. Dreams that grow from struggle. At the end of the chapter, Elijah stood in his old classroom. The ceiling still leaking, chairs still wobbly. But on the whiteboard, written in neat handwriting by young Malik, were the words, "The American dream is real, if you dare to dream, and dare to try." Elijah Carter. Elijah smiled. There was no more doubt. His journey had only just begun. And this time, he wasn't walking it alone. Washington, D.C., Spring 2019. Elijah, 24 years old, founder of the Dream Table. Classical building an invitation from Congress. In April 2019, Elijah received an unexpected email. "Dear Mr. Carter, we are honored to invite you to testify at a congressional hearing on educational inequality in America." At first, he thought it was a mistake. A black boy from the South Side, who once couldn't afford a textbook, now being asked to speak before Congress? But it wasn't a mistake. They needed to hear from someone real, someone who had lived the injustice. And Elijah was the honest voice the country was searching for. Microphone: the speech that silenced America. On the day Elijah stepped up to the podium, the congressional chamber fell silent. Before him sat bipartisan lawmakers, journalists, and a nationwide television audience. He didn't bring charts. No PowerPoint slides. He brought only one thing. A photograph of his father on the day he was sentenced. Elijah was just 5 years old. And then he began. "I'm not here to beg for sympathy. I'm here to tell you, what this system lacks isn't money. It's trust. Every time a black child is met with doubt, America loses a piece of its future. When my father was wrongfully imprisoned, I learned two things. Justice doesn't arrive on its own. And the American dream doesn't open itself to everyone. But I also learned a third thing. If you dare to dream and dare to try, you can open that door with your own hands." When Elijah stepped down, the entire chamber stood in applause. An elderly congresswoman whispered to her aide, "That young man, he's going places. Globe with meridians across America." After the speech, Elijah became a national figure in the media. Featured on CNN, NPR, Time magazine. His speech reached 20 million views in just 3 days. The hashtag Dream with Elijah went viral. Students across the country began writing to him. One 13-year-old girl from Alabama wrote, "I don't know if I'm as smart as you, but I think I can start dreaming again." Brick backlash and first blows. Like every strong voice, Elijah met fierce resistance. Branded a political actor. Mocked by Fox News, "Poor kid wants to lecture America." Received threats for inciting race division. One night, the office of the Dream Table was vandalized with graffiti. "Go back to the ghetto." Elijah looked at the words, didn't get angry. Instead, he picked up white paint and wrote over them, "From the ghetto, we dream big. And no one can stop us. Fire a turning point, young people rise." In 2020, as the Black Lives Matter movement surged after the death of George Floyd, Elijah was invited to lead one of the largest marches in Chicago, with over 100,000 participants. On stage, he didn't shout with fury. He spoke with calm conviction. "We don't march to divide. We march to remind America its promises must belong to every color. And if the American dream only works for white people, then it's not a dream. It's a privilege." Book's end of chapter, the first book in a growing journey. Later that year, Elijah published his first book, Not Born to Bow, a memoir of his journey from the slums to the halls of Congress. The book became a bestseller, adopted in over 30 universities, and translated into 7 languages. On the final page, he wrote, "I am Elijah, a black child who was not born to apologize for his skin, but to prove one thing. Strength is not about never falling. It's about falling and still daring to dream, ***. Chicago, summer 2021. Elijah, 26 years old, founder of the Dream Table. Brain the lingering question after every speech. After hundreds of speeches, millions of views, and thousands of thank you letters, Elijah still felt an emptiness inside. Are inspiring words enough? Or do I need to build a place where dreams aren't just spoken, but nurtured and realized? He remembered the nights of studying alone to the sound of gunshots. The days of not knowing where to find college info. The classrooms with no projectors, no one who'd ever gone to college to ask for guidance. He made a decision to build something unlike anything else. School from idea to blueprint, the Beacon Institute. Elijah assembled a small team of educators, curriculum designers, and former students from minority communities. He named the project the Beacon Institute. The institute would be a skills training, career orientation, and leadership development center for youth of color and immigrant backgrounds, completely free for students from low-income areas across America. A fusion of academics, soft skills, technology, and civic consciousness. Its motto: no one was born to live in the dark forever. Briefcased the fundraising battle and doors that refused to open. Despite his reputation, raising money for an independent education initiative was grueling. Elijah was rejected by 11 major foundations, with responses like, "The model has no precedent. Target audience too narrow. Not viable under proposed budget." But as always, Elijah didn't back down. He returned to where he began, the community. Within 3 months, he raised $1.2 million from the online community, $300,000 from alumni of the Dream Table, and a 5-year funding commitment from a private donor who had once seen Elijah's congressional speech. Brick humble beginnings, from abandoned school to beacon of hope. Elijah chose to build the institute on the grounds of a long-abandoned school in Englewood, Chicago, once known for having the city's highest crime rate. He and volunteers cleared trash by hand, patched walls, and painted classrooms. The first seen on opening day. 120 students from 12 states, mostly black, Latinx, or underprivileged Asian American, sat in a classroom that had once been a meeting place for gangs. Graduation cap, a school for future leaders, with a curriculum like no other. The Beacon Institute didn't offer a typical education. Courses included leadership thinking in an unjust world, storytelling and social change, from idea to movement, community action and practice. Internships were offered at Congress, nonprofits, and tech companies. Elijah personally taught one course called I Was You, for students who felt they weren't smart enough, white enough, or rich enough to succeed. Megaphone early impact and a promise for a new generation. In just 1 year, 90% of Beacon students were accepted into college. Over 60% chose to return to serve their communities. One student named Luis, who had nearly dropped out in New Mexico, was selected to speak at the United Nations on global education. In an internal report, Elijah wrote, "When you give a child tools, they can survive. But when you give them belief, they can change the world." End of chapter. A symbol no longer tied to one man. The Beacon Institute was no longer Elijah's creation alone. It had become a place where kids once labeled as hopeless stood up, said their names, and declared, "We're here. And we dream too." 2023, Elijah Carter, age 28. Candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, District 7, Chicago. Balance scale. The big question: to change the system, do you work outside it, or from within? After 3 years leading the Beacon Institute, Elijah came to a painful realization. I can transform hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. But if the policies stay the same, the next generation will still be left behind. One night, after hearing that his old high school in the South Side had its budget slashed for the 3rd year in a row, Elijah said in a closed meeting, "We've been shouting at the gates for long enough. Maybe it's time to step inside." Loudspeaker campaign announcement and a storm of public reaction. On February 5, 2023, Elijah held a press conference on the basketball court of his former school. "I'm Elijah Carter, son of a man wrongfully incarcerated, a graduate of District 7, someone who grew up inside the very policies that suffocate dreams. And today, I'm officially announcing, I'm running for the United States House of Representatives. I'm not running to represent a skin color. I'm running to represent the dreams that have been crushed." The media exploded. CNN, young leader challenges longtime congressman with community power. Fox News, radical activist seeks to push progressive agenda into Congress. Local residents, he's saying what we felt for years. Crossed swords. The uneven battle. Elijah's opponent, Congressman Thomas Grayson, 62, white, in office for 20 years, backed by corporate giants, and holding 68% of the district's vote in previous elections. People called Elijah a media phenomenon, a dreamer without realism. But he didn't run on gimmicks. He knocked on doors, spoke at kitchen tables, listened to stories that never made headlines. During a live televised debate, Grayson said, "You're too young to understand how the system works." Elijah calmly replied, "No, sir. I understand the system all too well. Because it's been shutting me out since I was 5. Ballot box with ballot. A historic win, in his first words in Congress. On November 6, 2023, Elijah won with 52.7% of the vote, becoming the youngest black congressman in Illinois history. His victory speech was brief, but moved millions to tears. Tonight, a black kid who was searched by police at age 12 was sent to Congress by the very people he grew up with. I didn't come here to become a politician. I came to remind this system. When you truly listen to the people at the bottom, only then are you serving this country." Classical building. First steps in Congress, a raw reality. The early days were sobering. Private offers to play along to keep his seat. Closed-door committee deals that never saw daylight. Political negotiations where ideals were sliced thin. An older congressman warned him, "You want to survive here? Learn when to close your eyes." Elijah simply smiled. "I didn't come here to survive. I came to open doors for those who've never been let in." Scroll first bill, the Justice Scholars Act. Elijah's first proposed legislation, the Justice Scholars Act. A federal scholarship fund for students in communities historically underfunded in education. The bill would provide tuition support, leadership training, and college pathways. It faced fierce opposition. Reverse discrimination. Unrealistic spending. Racial favoritism. But Elijah didn't back down. He used the same voice that had once moved millions. If someone falls into a hole we dug with our own hands, pulling them up isn't a favor. It's our duty. Book's end of chapter, a letter from young Elijah. The night before presenting his bill, Elijah found a crumpled paper inside an old suitcase. A letter he wrote to himself at age 13. If one day you have power, don't forget the nights I fell asleep hungry. Don't forget Mom's eyes, filled with hope and hopelessness. And don't forget, I never even dreamed of being a congressman, because they told me dreams like that aren't for black kids. Elijah folded the letter gently and whispered to himself, I never forgot you. And starting tomorrow, neither will Congress. 2023, Elijah Carter, age 28. Candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, District 7, Chicago. Balance scale. The big question: to change the system, do you work outside it, or from within? After 3 years leading the Beacon Institute, Elijah came to a painful realization. I can transform hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. But if the policies stay the same, the next generation will still be left behind. One night, after hearing that his old high school on the South Side had its budget slashed for the third year in a row, Elijah said in a closed meeting, "We've been shouting at the gates for long enough. Maybe it's time to step inside." Loudspeaker campaign announcement and a storm of public reaction. On February 5, 2023, Elijah held a press conference on the basketball court of his former school. I'm Elijah Carter, son of a man wrongfully incarcerated, a graduate of District 7, someone who grew up inside the very policies that suffocate dreams. And today, I'm officially announcing, I'm running for the United States House of Representatives. I'm not running to represent a skin color. I'm running to represent the dreams that have been crushed. The media exploded. CNN, young leader challenges longtime congressman with community power. Fox News, radical activist seeks to push progressive agenda into Congress. Local residents, he's saying what we've felt for years. Crossed swords. The uneven battle. Elijah's opponent, Congressman Thomas Grayson, 62, white, in office for 20 years, backed by corporate giants, and holding 68% of the district's vote in previous elections. People called Elijah a media phenomenon, a dreamer without realism. But he didn't run on gimmicks. He knocked on doors, spoke at kitchen tables, listened to stories that never made headlines. During a live televised debate, Grayson said, "You're too young to understand how the system works." Elijah calmly replied, "No, sir. I understand the system all too well, because it's been shutting me out since I was 5. Ballot box with ballot. A historic win, in his first words in Congress. On November 6, 2023, Elijah won with 52.7% of the vote, becoming the youngest black congressman in Illinois history. His victory speech was brief, but moved millions to tears. Tonight, a black kid who was searched by police at age 12 was sent to Congress by the very people he grew up with. I didn't come here to become a politician. I came to remind this system. When you truly listen to the people at the bottom, only then are you serving this country. Classical building. First steps in Congress, a raw reality. The early days were sobering. Private offers to play along to keep his seat. Closed-door committee deals that never saw daylight. Political negotiations where ideals were sliced thin. An older congressman warned him, "You want to survive here? Learn when to close your eyes." Elijah simply smiled. "I didn't come here to survive. I came to open doors for those who've never been let in." Scroll. First bill, the Justice Scholars Act. Elijah's first proposed legislation, the Justice Scholars Act. A federal scholarship fund for students in communities historically underfunded in education. The bill would provide tuition support, leadership training, and college pathways. It faced fierce opposition. Reverse discrimination. Unrealistic spending. Racial favoritism. But Elijah didn't back down. He used the same voice that had once moved millions. If someone falls into a hole we dug with our own hands, pulling them up isn't a favor. It's our duty. Book's end of chapter, a letter from young Elijah. The night before presenting his bill, Elijah found a crumpled paper inside an old suitcase. A letter he wrote to himself at age 13. If one day you have power, don't forget the nights I fell asleep hungry. Don't forget Mom's eyes, filled with hope and hopelessness. And don't forget, I never even dreamed of being a congressman. Because they told me dreams like that aren't for black kids. Elijah folded the letter gently and whispered to himself, I never forgot you. And starting tomorrow, neither will Congress. Washington, D.C., May 2024. After the explosive press conference and the fierce backlash from conservatives, Elijah didn't retreat. Instead, he began rebuilding his movement, not alone, but united. Compass it started with a message, I stand with you. A week after the press conference, Elijah received a message from a young Asian American legislator named Layla Nguyen, a state representative from California. They're coming after me too, for proposing reforms to the ethnic studies curriculum. But I won't back down. I think it's time we stop standing alone. Layla introduced Elijah to a quiet network of young legislators, across race, gender, party lines, from Georgia to Illinois, Texas to New York. They all had one thing in common. They had once been told they were too radical, too inexperienced, or too different to be taken seriously. Speech balloon. A historic Zoom call, 16 people, 12 states, one purpose. In June 2024, Elijah hosted a private Zoom meeting with the group. They called themselves Caucus 2040, since most were under 40, and all shared a bold vision for America's future. Layla proposed, this isn't just about resistance. We need to rewrite the system. Step by step, education laws, policing policy, housing justice, freedom of expression. If we're not invited to the table, then let's build a new table. Elijah stayed silent for a moment. Then he smiled. This is no longer just my dream. Classical building founding the Next Gen Justice Alliance, with a 5-point manifesto. By the summer, they officially launched the Next Gen Justice Alliance, a cross-party coalition of young legislators at state and federal levels with a shared mission. The 5-point manifesto. Equity in education, dismantle dual school systems segregated by race. Justice system reform, end racially biased arrest policies. Fair access to housing, eliminate discriminatory zoning and planning laws. Tech and AI accountability, prevent algorithms that disproportionately harm minorities. Free speech and peaceful protest, defend the right to speak out and dissent. Megaphone. The From Classroom to Congress tour sparks a national wave. Elijah launched the From Classroom to Congress campaign, a series of talks, workshops, and podcasts connecting students to young lawmakers. At every stop, he asked, if you didn't have to wait until you're older to be heard, what would you do for the world right now? His speech at Howard University went viral, gaining over 15 million views on TikTok and YouTube. Bar chart. Early wins, Illinois, Georgia, and Oregon pass equity education bills. Thanks to lobbying by Layla and other members of the alliance, within just 4 months, 3 states passed education equity bills based on the group's drafts. Veteran lawmakers began to take notice. A headline in the Atlantic read, Martin's generation dreamed. Elijah's generation is delivering. Collision. Conservative backlash, accusations of dividing America. Far-right channel Fox Nation launched a full series attacking Elijah, Layla, and the Next Gen Justice Alliance. They don't love this country. They're using skin color to tear the Constitution apart. An elderly congressman warned, if we don't crush this movement now, Congress will be filled with hoodie-wearing radicals in 10 years. Elijah just smiled as he watched the segment. The more afraid they are, the more I know we're on the right path. The flame has spread. At a youth town hall in Atlanta, a 13-year-old boy stood up and asked Elijah, do you think someone like me could ever become a congressman? Elijah knelt down and looked him straight in the eye. I don't just think so. I'm working to build an America where you can dream that, and no one laughs. The fire in Elijah no longer belonged to him alone. It had been shared across hundreds of hearts, and had become a collective flame, lighting the way toward an America where a colorblind dream was no longer just an ideal, but a reality in the making.